You were created to create.
And now that you're here, the only way to unlock and unfold that is you find ways to continue to create.
When you stop learning, you stop growing. Your biggest purpose is how are you going to crack the code on you?
Tune in Tuesday. It's your boy, Matt Lee. Allergic to Average family. Welcome back. We're on a continuation right now. All right. So step 2, I mentioned it last week. We're going to hop into, right? We're in the A16 Basics. Step 2 today, which is look. Okay. Which is look. So I'm going to just hop into it because I got a lot to say. But I wanted to start with this statistic. All right. So 95% of people believe they are self-aware. Research says only 10 to 15% actually are. Okay, I want that to set in for just a bit. All right, 95% of people believe that they are self-aware, but research says only 10 to 15 actually are. So I'm sure you're probably wondering, well, am I that 10%? Am I that 15%? Right. That means statistically, most people watching me right now think that they are self-aware, right? They know themselves. But most of them are wrong, and you could be too. Now, I say that with love, okay? I say that with love because this is not an insult. This is actually an invitation into what we're talking about, of course, but into this idea in this way, and that's exactly what step 2 is about. That's what it's all about. All right. So, real quick, I want you to drop a number 1. Drop a 1 in the comments if that statistic surprised you, all right? 95% of people thinking they're aware, self-aware, only 10 to 15, research showing us that, hey, only 10 to 15% actually are. So drop a 1 if that surprised you, okay? I wanted to see real quick how many, because that actually surprised me. I mean, I knew it was a lot, and I knew that more than half of people that think they're aware are not, but I didn't realize it was 95% think, but only 10 to 15 are. So I want to kind of look into bridging from step 1. We talked about abandon. And again, it's always so much of reframing what you think you know, what you've experienced, what we think we've learned or understand. A lot of times we got to reframe the old ways, right? That was part of abandoned from last week. And so in step 2, I want us to talk about, how we took this idea of abandoning, right? Clearing space, pretty much letting go of what's been filling our life and kind of keeping us stuck in a lot of ways. And so if you missed that, actually go back and watch that one. Watch that one first. I would. But here's the question that nobody asks. Okay. After I clear that space, after I start letting go, now what? Okay. What happens now? What do I do with the room that I just made? From what I've let go and released, what do I do now? What happens? Right. We have an idea, but a lot of times it's like, okay, but what does that practically actually look like for me? So it's step 2. You look. Okay. You look. And so the distinction, most people, this is the distinction I want you to see. Most people, they're going to, look their whole life around them, with society, things that have happened, right? Without ever truly seeing. And that's an issue, right? That's a big issue. They look for results, but they blame their circumstances. I mean, that happens all the time. They look at their habits and they call it, that's my personality trait. I guess that's just the way I was, which I can't stand that. They look for patterns in their life and they call it fate. That's just what it is. I guess that's just fate. I don't know what to tell you, right? And so this idea of look and to really become more self-aware and why is this important? And that's because, I want you to think about a photographer. So like when you're inside the picture, let's say you're on the other side of the lens, you're actually in the picture that is being taken. You can't see the frame. You can't see the full frame of the picture. You're only experiencing a small piece of it, which is you, maybe with people, maybe, just by yourself, but you're in the frame and you're in the picture. You're only a small part of it. Awareness now what that self-awareness and just that concept of awareness in general, allowing yourself to gaze your attention in a specific direction, to examine something, right? That awareness, what that allows you to do is get outside of the picture. As the photographer who can see the full frame, who can see everybody, who can be like almost what feels like an outsider looking upon into, okay? That's what awareness does. You can finally now see the whole shot as a photographer, right? And so that's really so much of what we have to come back into this way of seeing is there's a lot of things because of our lack of awareness or our lack of commitment to awareness that we miss. We don't see it all. We think we see it all. We think we're seeing everything that's playing out and how life is, but we have to get into this perspective of where the photographer comes in, right? So for your own life, instead of being in the picture, you're the photographer seeing yourself, seeing your life, how it plays out, where you've come from. And that really becomes the better approach, the better perspective that is healthier and sustainable in growing with. And so Viktor Frankl, he was a survivor of the Holocaust, probably one of the greatest minds of the 20th century. And, he said, there's a quote that he says, between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space is our power to choose our response. Okay. So that's that space, that pause that he's talking about, that right there is the awareness, or should I say, that is what awareness gives you. It gives you that pause, that space to just, whoa, let me think about it. Okay. Because without it, so often without taking, even in a moment of conversation or, from one thing to the next, without growing in that awareness, that pause between that stimulus and that response, that space, without it, see, we're just reacting and repeating those reactions. And this is why we see cycles and patterns that create that we don't like. And so I like when I think about that quote, and when we kind of think about scripture echoes in James 1:19. And it said it simply. It says, look, be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to anger. And so that is the pause, right? This reminder in James when it brings up this importance to be quick to listen. And I don't know if you ever heard that growing up, right? That's I think my dad always told me that's why you have 2 ears and 1 mouth. You should be listening twice as much as you talk. And so scripture also reflects that truth. Like, hey, be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to anger. And that allows us to create this pause, this space, right? That becomes the practice. That is the invitation that we're reminded of in James 1:19. And so I want to talk about, there's four directions in this step. 4 directions for us to really look, to become aware of, to examine, to evaluate, right? And so this first direction is the hardest to face, but it's the most important, okay? So I want you to track with me. And the reason why it's the hardest but the most important is because the first direction we have to start with is ourself. Okay, you got to start with yourself. So the first direction to look is inward. How do we start to look and examine and grow awareness on the inward works, the inner infrastructure is what I call it, right? Of who we are and what conducts and makes us who we are and everything that we do. So the reason why that's important is because with self-awareness, right, that becomes the foundation. That is the foundation for really everything. And a lot of the places that I've gone and I've given keynote talks, workshop talks, conference talk, I'm the speaker, like at the camp, like so much of this goes into me talking about things like emotional intelligence, relationships, leadership, growth, personal development. And so look, all of those things are actually built by self-awareness. Okay. That's actually the foundation, and you can't build anything above it until you first have built this foundation of what is, this self-awareness and of yourself and how you respond. So we got to look inward. And there's really 4 questions when we come into looking inwardly. If you're taking notes, this would be great to jot down right here. But what are the 4 questions when we look in this first direction of inward? Okay. And so I had to make my notes on these to make sure I got them right for you today. So the first question is, who are you? Really? Like who are you? Not the version that performs for others, not the one that shows up when it's convenient, but like who's that version of you? Like, who are you really whenever you got to show up and it costs something, right? When nobody's watching, whenever nobody's on you or telling you have to, like, who are you? That's really the first question when we're looking inward. The second one is, what do you do? Like, what do you actually do? What are the patterns that you keep repeating in life, regardless of your intentions? That's the second question. The third one would be, why do you do it? Okay, why do you do it? Why is it that you do what you do? What fear is driving your behavior, or often does, or what ambition drives you, or often does? Because a lot of times we have to realize too, like, your behavior is not the root of the issue or the root of really who you are. It's a symptom to something deeper, right? And the fourth question when looking inward would be, how do you do it? How do you do it? What is the gap between how you think you show up and how you actually show up with others? What is like understanding? A lot of people think they're hard workers or they're go-getters or they have some grit, and then they show up to a workplace or they show up with the work crew and they don't have it. So how do you do it? How do you do what you do? How do you do it? How do you actually show up? And so often we have to start inward, because this actually allows us to identify and become aware of what is apparent in a part of all of our lives, different seasons, different moments. We find sometimes very harshly, inconveniently, sometimes through humility, we can find it in grace, but we find we have blind spots. This is a part of life. So Jesus talks about this. He talked about this over 2,000 years ago, before, psychology had a name for it. But in Matthew 7, he says, why do you look at a speck in your brother's eye when there's a plank in your own? Okay, Matthew 7, I love when Jesus is talking about this. That plank is the blind spot. That's what he's alluding to. He's showing us. He makes it clear that you cannot see anything else that's going on, at least the truth of it, until you can deal with the blind spots, or maybe it's the insecurities, or maybe it's the traumas or the heart wounds or the negative patterns that exist in your own life. You can't help other people with those things until you've become aware of that plank in your own eye. Okay? And so I love that Jesus brings that up. There's another study that was done that formed, and it's the Jara window, and this becomes something that is really what psychologists use to map out this idea. Okay, so there's a version of you that is visible to everybody else around you that knows you, and you can't see it yourself. You can't see that version of you for yourself. Now I'm talking about people that are closest to you, that spend more time around you. There's a version of you that is visible to them, and that everyone knows that version of you, but you are blind to it. You can't see it yourself. Okay, and that's the blind quadrant. Okay, and there's more work within this window that I'm talking about. And the only way to see it, the reason why I bring this up is because the only way to see it is to really allow yourself to humble yourself enough to allow people, others. Now, these can be close friends. These could be like brothers, like sisters. These can be family members. These could be like mentors. But the only way to get rid of that blind spot, that plank in your eye, often is you allow people through humility who love you and will tell you the truth. That is, I should say, the actual truth, okay? They may be able to share truth, but you allow people to speak into maybe where you've dropped the ball or where you could be better or where you could do better. And that's really the only way that when we start to look into the inward, how do we eliminate blind spots and these things that maybe we're not catching? That's really one of the biggest ways that psychologists have shown us. So, some more of the scripture that I reflect, and it goes back to, kind of that ancient wisdom that we can constantly get from scriptures. Psalms 139:23 says, "Search me, God, and know my heart. See if there's any offense in me." And this is really like a designed mindset type prayer. As I was thinking about, I was like, this is really, search me, like know my heart. See if there's any offensive ways. See if there's anything that I need to do. See if there's basically any planks in my life that I'm unaware of. Okay. And that's really what it looks like to look, to become aware, to examine. And instead of like choosing to just assume, no, I'm good. There's nothing wrong. I don't, right? Like the default mindset so often gets back into this place where it assumes it knows everything. I got it. It's fine. No. And then, again, that's from last week when I talked about pride and ego. That's so much of where this comes from. And so the design mindset, though, which we're moving more into, is it examines itself and it notices and it starts to pay attention to these things, these patterns, right? And so one is this default mind is running on like guesses is really what it feels like. And so the other is running on truth, which is often obviously the better thing, obviously the worthy thing, the go-to thing, what we should have, but it's a lot easier to just run on guesses, even if they're just guesses, because sometimes it is hard to deal with the truth and really what the truth is. And so, okay, within, just to kind of on our first, should I say, direction inwardly, which of those four questions really hit you? Okay. Is it really the who? Is it really more of the what? Is it more of the why or the how of you? Okay. And drop that in the comments. Okay. As far as which one is it the hardest, should I say, for you to examine, to really, maybe it's all four. Maybe, when it comes to the who of you, the what of you, the why of you, the how of you, you really don't spend a lot of time. So maybe you can say, hey, all four. But if there was one or maybe even two that you could list in the comments, which one is a challenge, probably the biggest challenge to examine and to really like look inwardly towards? Okay, I want you to think about that. Okay, so as you put that in the comments, I want to move on to the second direction of where we look, right? There's four directions within look in awareness. And so that second one is we have to be able to look outward. Okay, so we start inward. Okay, you become aware of what, not only what's, that's the start, not only what is inward, not only the inner infrastructure of you, but once you start there, okay, we don't just stay inward, then we also have to go outward, right? It starts inward and then we start to move and we start to look at, really what makes allergic to average real. Okay. So I want you to step back. Okay. I want you to just you can even close your eyes for a sec. And I want you to just kind of think about, look at what majority of people around you are doing. If you think about society, you think about the community you live in, maybe it's family members, right? But just in general, what are people doing? What do their relationships look like? Whether it's marriage or, dating, what are their finances? A lot of this, it's hard to actually know, but what would you assume? Or what do you know when it comes to, the higher level of finances for people or, people that struggle with that? What are the habits that you notice around you or that the average person typically does? What is their mindset? And I want you to really just like examine that and look carefully, because of that analysis, of that evaluation that you can kind of get mentally, a lot of times the quickest way to become allergic to average is you now see that, you're aware of that, and you start to learn how to do the opposite. That's such a funny concept to me. But really, one of the quickest ways to become allergic to the average is notice what the average is doing and you do the opposite. You start to show up differently, right? Now, I want you to see that in the science has even so. Let me bring you here. In 1951, a psychologist named Simon. Okay, he ran this experiment, and this is crazy to me. So people were to answer a simple question with an obvious answer. Okay, so it was a group of people, and the one person that wasn't aware of what was going on would come in, and the other people, the majority of the group, they were all like actors. They were all on the same page. And so they would ask him to come in and they would ask the whole group a question and the whole group would answer it, a lot of times out loud or by voting. And so with the group around them, 75% of people, okay, even when an individual who was kind of being tested, even when an individual knew the obvious answer and saw it with their eyes, when the majority said something different, 75% went along with it. Okay? 75%. Their own eyes told them the truth. They saw it individually for themselves, but then they ignored it because the group said no. Everybody else said, no, this is the answer. And even though they knew the truth and they could evaluate that for themselves because everybody else said it was this, they were like, oh, I must be wrong. Let me follow them. So this plays out all day, every day in our society. And often for you and I, right? Subconsciously, we don't even, we're not even aware of how this is playing out. And so this is the default mind, the average mind at scale, okay? Following nobody towards nowhere. This is what we see all the time in workplaces, in communities, in homes, you name it. And so here's I always talk about contrast, and contrast to me, it really is the gift of life. Understanding and seeing, and that's so much of where this topic, to become aware, really, it just gains so much advantage in your life. You can gain so much advantage with this by realizing the contrast between the average, the default, versus the allergic to average, the design, okay? And so I want to just kind of give you some differences, So like when society says hate, we need to hate, these people deserve hate, or we should hate them, the allergic to average choose love. And it's not because it's easy. That's not the reason. It's because it's stronger. It's bigger. It's more sustainable. It's more powerful, right? When the default mind wants to take, right? We're a very give me, I'll take what's mine or what belongs to me. The allergic to average, we give, right? It's not we need this. It's just going to be easier to give. It's where most people wait to be served. We serve first. That's an allergic to average thinker. Okay. Where the crowd wants to hold grudges, we forgive. And it's not for them. This is for our own freedom. When everybody else is on this easy, well-traveled, well-worn road, just a path in life, the allergic to average find a way to get off. And you blaze into something, you start to build into something new. That's the difference. This is the contrast here. But when you notice the outward, what everybody else is doing, what the average would choose, that doesn't mean it's the right thing. That just means it's the easier thing. The allergic to average know, they see, and they begin to choose differently. And so scripture, it reminds us, I love when Jesus talks about, he says, enter through the narrow gate. This sums this all up. Wide is the gate that leads to destruction, and many enter through it. Many. The average is going to take that path. But small is the gate, and narrow is the road that leads to life. And only few, okay, let me say that again, and only few find it. That's Matthew chapter 7, verse 13 and 14. So this is the idea, again, many versus the few. many want to do this. Many say this is the way it should be. Many say this is where it exists and has to be. The few, which is you and I, right? Which is anybody who decides to begin to, like in last week's talk, release, let go, abandon, okay? These patterns, these things that are no longer serving, and then begin to notice and look and grow in your awareness. This is where you start to become one of the few. It's not something that you have to be born with. It's not something that is a gift or a talent that you have to have. It's a decision that you have to commit to and you have to continue to grow into. And so, one of the foundational scriptures, or I should say the foundational scripture is, this comes from Romans 12:2. And in short, it says, do not conform to the patterns of this world. Again, we're talking about the natural tendencies, the patterns, the cycles that you see happen around you, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Okay, don't be conformed, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. So you cannot renew what you're refused to look at. Just like when we talked about in the first direction of, which direction to start to notice, to look into, which is inward. So that's why that's important. But then we also start to notice what are the patterns around me? What does everybody else say is okay or is the way to go? And as you renew your mind, you're renewing your way of living and existing and experiencing. And so the quickest, path to becoming, again, allergic to average is you look at what the average looks like, what they are doing consistently, what they do deliberately sometimes. But we choose to move in a different direction. We choose on purpose how to move, how to show up, and how to choose different. And so I want to move into, that was the second direction we look, right? So we first talked about inward, and then we moved into outward. And then I want to give you the next two together, which is we have to look at feedback, and then we also have to look at what is in our hands, okay? And so I want to give you both of these and you seeing why we need this feedback. All right, why is that another direction to look? And why should we be looking at what is in our hands? What do we already have? And so your results are not accidents, okay? They're feedback. This is why we're talking about, this is the other direction. You start to look at what has been the feedback I'm getting in life? What has been the response that life has given me towards the way I'm showing up, the way I'm doing things, okay? So again, your results are, they're not accidents. They're not just things you're doing. Your results are actual feedback. Okay, they are the world's response of the inputs of what you've been given and what you've been doing and how that's been, providing or a lack of providing for you in life. Maybe you don't feel fulfilled. Maybe you are. Maybe you don't feel like you have enough resource, money, like attention, like I don't know, but maybe you do. And so this is all feedback, okay? And so, success leaves clues, failure, it leaves clues. A lot of it is, where are you directing? Which one are you listening to? Which one are you paying to? How are you utilizing that feedback? Is really what I want us to become more and more aware of, at least. And so, research found that the single most effective key to breaking a habit, it isn't willpower. Okay, the single most effective key to breaking a habit isn't willpower. Okay, so if it's not willpower, what could it be? If it's it's awareness, okay? It's actual awareness. It's actually you looking and noticing what is triggering you to become angry or to want to be violent or to want to drink or want to, like it's growing an awareness to the trigger. That moment that you can see and notice actually starts to put the stop to it, okay? And so we see that's even more with, the scripture. When we talk about scripture, there's also whoever loves discipline loves knowledge, but whoever hates correction is stupid. Now, that may be harsh. I get it, but it's honest, right? It's honestly the willingness to receive feedback without getting defensive or, that is the actual mark of somebody who wants to grow more. Right? That wants to grow into right thought and right heart and right action, right? That's actual feedback and displays of, okay, what is it that I need to do? What is it that I could do? And so that's so much of why this feedback is important. And so the second thing that I want to kind of start hitting on is that other direction. You can start looking into what's in your hands. What do you have, should I say, that is already in your existence, that you're already sitting on, that you already have access to, or that you've already expanded into, that you've already built into in your life, and you have access to that, right? And so I want to, this what should I say? How should I say that? It's almost like this inventory of what you actually have versus what you feel like you don't or what you feel like you do, right? We become actually honest about, what do I have? What is it that I should be looking at? One thing that when I was first starting in business, I realized more and more was, I was looking at how much money do I need to start this or to do this, and then I need this kind of program, or I need this kind of and the list went on. But I had a good buddy of mine stop and kind of really break down and get into this way of thinking, like, what do you actually have already? What's in your hands, right? Who are the people you already know that you have, some kind of relationship to, that you could call upon? What are those things that, even when it came to physical things, what are those things that you have already? Maybe it's not this microphone, but, back then I had a microphone. It wasn't a very great one, but it's like, I wanted another camera, for this, so it'd be more perfect, but I already had a camera I could use, right? So it's like, what do you have? So you stop waiting for these perfect conditions and you look at what you already have there, and you start. You're like, okay, look, I may not have this, I may not have that, but I at least have this to start with. That's the difference between a default thinker or a design thinker, okay? And so we start looking for and noticing what is in our hands after, we first started noticing, okay, I want this, I need this, but what do I have to start with? And a lot of times when you actually give yourself the permission to create that almost inventory list of what do you have, you start paying attention to the knowledge you've gained, the relationships, that you've gained in life, the experiences through hardship, pain, you have a lot more, okay? I would say 9 times out of 10, you have a lot more than you are giving yourself credit or you're even aware of. And so that's why that's so important, okay? And so those were the last 2 directions of where to look. That was, look at the feedback in life. And then also look at what's in your hands, okay? So, I mean, as I kind of always examine in these things, again, I don't come to just like teach you this idea, these philosophies, this this theory. I've come to teach you things that I've lived, and I'm talking about, somebody that, for whoever you are watching this, there's a lot of times that I've known that people I'm talking to, or if there's something that's pulled you into like a topic like this, maybe it feels like you've been in a place or a position, maybe, you've wanted to examine and figure out and notice more, and maybe you've gained some of that. But I feel like there's a lot more people that are, you're living maybe on like autopilot. And you're kind of going through, you're getting through the motions, you're kind of taking the day on as it is. And I totally get this. This isn't I've been in seasons, and even one here really recently, where it felt like I was just more on autopilot because there's so much to do. How do you even have time for yourself? How do you even have time to stop and look and like, I get it. But whoever I'm speaking to, whoever resonates, I know that there's somebody that's watching, and you've been on autopilot. You've been going through, you've been doing what needs to be done. You're getting results. Getting just results, and you didn't choose necessarily. It's what you felt like to have these, or to have it play out this way, and maybe it just seems like a repeat, and maybe there's a pattern, and you're going back to this autopilot. And have you ever? This is kind of my question. Is just like, have you ever stopped and just really evaluated, looked, and noticed what is that pattern? What is that feedback you're getting? Why is it that if you feel like you're on autopilot, or that you feel like you're just going through motions at time, why? Right? That's how we actually get into moving into out of assumption into the truth of the matter. And so as we become more aware as we do stop and we give ourselves maybe those quiet mornings or quiet nights to spend with ourselves. Maybe it's journaling, maybe it's taking a walk, maybe it's meditating, it's prayer. Awareness removes the excuse. Okay, I'll say that again. The awareness, the reason why that is important is because you can then become aware of why you feel like you're on autopilot or why you're stuck in these patterns. And that awareness is what actually removes the excuse. And it doesn't do it by force. It's not like you're taking yourself into a boot camp. It does it by light. It's the truth that sheds light onto something that allows it to no longer exist, to kind of be extinguished. And so, and this has been years ago. And I wanted to share something as I close of how this is practical and been real for me. Because with some embarrassment and shame behind it, I guess there was a time where, I was told by a couple other what was cousins at the time, or then telling me this, and maybe a couple of people within my friends group from school and church that, were some of my good friends, should I say. But for me, one thing I was unaware of was like my humor, my sarcasm, like how kind of rough it could be, how kind of rude it could be. Again, I was joking. I'm joking, right? I'm joking. I was just playing. But I then was getting feedback from these family members and even close friends that was like, man, bro, that was kind of harsh. That was kind of mean, And I'm like, whatever. That's not a big deal. I was just playing. Y'all know I joke. I'm a jokester, right? But I had to become aware of how that was affecting others. And I had to bring that into a place where it wasn't by like, oh, Matt, you're an asshole. Like you're being so mean. And it wasn't by force. It was just becoming aware of it and being honest with the fact of how I was showing up and the words that I was choosing, the jokes, the humor I was using was doing more harm to others, especially these close people to me. And so I had to become aware of it, but then also find a way to eliminate that, right? To abandon that. But I had to bring it to the light, and I had to be completely honest with like, hey, bro, even though you think it's funny or it's not affecting you in a negative way, this is how it's affecting others. And so I had to change that up. And I still joke. I'll still roast you. But I've learned that, instead of having this excuse for being, rude or hurting people's feelings, or maybe people just don't want to be around you because you're always talking shit or you're always roasting them. You can still do that, but being aware, like for me, I had to become aware of how I do that and how this is affecting others. And I had to eliminate that, right? I had to let go of that and release that so that I could enhance and just really build the relationships I did have and we're going to continue to have to a stronger and a better place. And so, I just like last week, I want you to be a participant, not just, you observing and watching, but I want you to just think about, the four directions of where, we talked about 4 different fours. So I'm closing right here, but I want you to think about where is it that you need to start, where do you want to start to examine on the 4 directions of where to look? Is it inward? And if you've never done inward, I'd say, please start there. Okay. And if it's not inward, maybe you spend time evaluating, processing. What does that look like outwardly? Okay. And then the other 2, what does it look like to look into the feedback that your life has been giving you? And that really kind of examines really both the inward look and the outward look when you start to look into the feedback. Okay. And then also maybe for some of you, you need to start just paying attention to what's in your hands. What are actual resources and things that are available that you've been sitting on, that you've been waiting for, that you already have access to? So put that in the comments, and I want you to kind of really just think about that. If you can tonight, maybe it's tomorrow morning, and you get some quiet time, what is it that you could write down on, any of these areas, and really the who, what, the why, the how of you. Maybe you spend some time evaluating what are those pieces when you start to look inwardly, when we look at the what of you and the why of you and the how of you, right? Like we start to really examine what is the truth behind those. And when you spend time with yourself, and sometimes again, We have this version of us that we don't even see, and we need other people that care for us, people that really do love us, people that know us pretty well. We have to allow them to speak into, where they see blind spots or giving us some of that feedback. And so, look, I wanted to just kind of end on this, because what it really comes back to is the world is full of people in motion. They're not actually seeing, they're just doing. We've gone really great at doing things and what looks like busy, but they're repeating. A lot of people are just repeating these cycles that they've never even examined, and they just call it fate. They just call it, oh, that is what it is, right? But following the crowds that you've never questioned, doing the things that everybody else is doing, is not this is what crushes my heart for so many people, because the answer is to stop, to step back, to begin to look for yourself, sometimes for the first time, and really begin to see with light, see with truth. And so, anyways, without me getting off on a riff too long there, that's the importance of step number 2, or again, we can call that chapter 2. This ability to look, the importance to evaluate, to become aware, to grow in awareness, especially self-awareness. And so this is what makes the difference right here. This is where we really start getting into moving and living as the allergic to average individual that we are. And so I want to bring that to an end. This is, again, step 2, a look of the A16 Basics. It's me, Matt Lee, here in the studio. And stay tuned. Next week, we go into step 3, which is the second L from Allergic. And I want to leave you on that. I appreciate you as always. I appreciate your time and your attention and your love. And so I'll see you next week for the step 3 in our A16 Basics. Until then, y'all have a great one. Have a great rest of your week. And I got nothing but love for you. Your boy, Matt Lee, I'm out. Stay allergic.